With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
How do you win a political fight? This is a question that has intrigued Slate's Christina Cauterucci for a while now. Christina's thought about this question because she's a political reporter, but it's also personal to her. Christina's gay, and she's watched with increasing alarm as her identity has become a talking point for conservatives over the last few years.
Florida's so-called Don't Say Gay bill is one step closer to becoming law today. This as it makes its way to Governor
Christina watched as Florida passed its Parental Rights in Education Act, a bill that advocates called Don't Say Gay. And the laws didn't stop there.
A controversial vote tonight over whether or not school officials are obligated to tell parents if their children identify as transgender.
Then there were the grim consequences of these laws.
LGBT advocates are seeing a spike in the number of teens calling suicide hotlines.
They say the increase comes after
all of which returned Christina to that same question. How do you win a political fight? It turns out, when it comes to gay rights, there is an answer to that question. There's even a playbook. It starts with something called the Briggs Initiative. And in the latest season of the Slate podcast, Slow Burn, Christina learns all about it.
I actually almost felt ashamed when I started reading about the Briggs Initiative at how little I knew about it, because obviously I'm 36. I've had plenty of time to educate myself about queer history, but I think I really only knew sort of the broad strokes of this particular political fight, which made it really exciting for me and felt like a big step for me in sort of my own understanding of who I am and who my community is.
The Briggs Initiative was a ballot proposition that went to a vote back in 1978. It would have essentially banned gay and lesbian people from working in California schools. And the politicians behind this push, their arguments sound familiar.
It is not a question of civil rights or human rights, but it is one of parents' rights and simply one of morality.
But the Briggs Initiative was voted down. And Christina wanted to know how. So she tracked down the people who fought against this ballot measure. And she took notes. If there was one lesson that you learned from going back and studying this pivotal year for gay rights, what would you want people to take from that time to fold into how we're thinking about now?
The people who fought the Briggs Initiative took a really long view on what they were doing. And they thought, we're not necessarily going to win this fight, but we have to fight it like we can win.
Today on the show, what Americans can learn now from a 50-year-old political battle. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This show is brought to you by Public. If you are looking for simple yet sophisticated investing, Public.com says click on over and check them out. From stocks to options, bonds to crypto, it is all there. You can even earn an industry-leading 5.1% APY on your cash. Public is trusted by millions of investors, and NerdWallet just gave Public 4.6 stars and calls it an impressive experience. Sign up in 2 minutes at Public.com. All your investing in one place. This is a paid advertisement for Public Investing, 5.1% APY as of June 17th, 2024, and is subject to change. NerdWallet overall rating 4.6 out of 5 as of May 2024. Full disclosures in the podcast description. This episode is brought to you by Washington Wise. Decisions made in Washington affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear stories making news right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including the policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation fears, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise or wherever you listen. This season of Slow Burn was organized loosely around the 1978 fight over the Briggs Initiative, which was a ballot measure in California that would have made it possible for gays and lesbians to be kicked out of their teaching jobs in public schools simply for being publicly gay. You profiled John Briggs, the guy behind this initiative, as well as the people who fought against his proposal. So why don't we start with John Briggs? Like, who was he? Why did he want to keep gay school teachers out of the classroom?
John Briggs was a state senator from Orange County who was highly influenced by the ascendant right wing in Orange County. You know, we're talking John Birch Society, Richard Nixon.
As a conservative, I oppose liberal programs or radical programs, as the case might be.
He was somebody who had a religious upbringing, but once he made it to public office, wasn't really that religious himself. But he really wanted to become governor. He had really high ambitions for himself and always sort of felt like he wasn't getting the recognition he deserved in the state Senate. So in 1977, he watches as Anita Bryant wins in Florida on this anti-gay campaign to roll back non-discrimination protections for gay people. And he sees the religious right sort of consolidating power in these communities. And he thinks he sees a route to the governor's mansion. So he decides to put a proposition on the ballot that would ban gays and lesbians from teaching in public schools and anyone who publicly advocates for gay rights from working in public schools.
Tell me why anyone thought the Briggs Initiative was necessary in the first place.
There was this idea, this sort of pernicious lie that was pretty popular and widely held in the 1970s, that there was something inherently suspect about gay people who wanted to be around children, and that gay people had sexual proclivities for children, were going to molest your kids, or if they weren't going to molest your kids, they were at least going to try to recruit them into homosexuality and be a terrible, depraved influence on your child's morality.
The homosexual community wants the right to serve as a role model for your children. Somebody one time said, just give me a generation of teaching children and I will have that country. And that is what this issue is all about, is children. And who will influence children and in which direction will they be turned?
In the end, I feel like your season of Slow Burn ends up being a step-by-step instruction manual for how a political minority, in this case gay people, builds power. You introduce this wide cast of characters who made the case against the Briggs Initiative. And I'm wondering if we can talk about how they did that. Because at the time when the Briggs Initiative was being debated, people saw California as like the gayest state in the union. So how did the queer community in San Francisco and other places respond to what they saw as a clear threat?
Yeah, there was this idea that if they didn't stop this national backlash in California, there would be no stopping it. That they were the only people who could because, yeah, San Francisco was sort of the gay capital of America. Los Angeles, highly gay. This was the place where people might actually have a chance. And they did not agree on how to do it. I mean, the gay community was incredibly diverse, as it always has been. And there were many different strains of activism going on around the Briggs Initiative. There were people who were sort of the more professional, mainstream politics, moneyed, sort of small c conservative gay people who took a little bit of a more muted approach, and they talked about human rights. They were actually, I think of them as sort of the don't say gay gays, because they were like, yeah, look, we can't scare people. They raised a ton of money and they did a statewide ad campaign about it. Then there were the grassroots activists who aligned with unions, which was incredibly smart because, you know, unions, including a lot of blue collar unions that signed on against the Briggs Initiative, weren't necessarily very vocal about gay rights. There was not the strong alliance between unions and LGBTQ people that there is today. But this was a very clear threat to people. They were going to override teachers' contracts. So they got 1,000 unions to sign on board. That's a really powerful political tool. And then there were people like Harvey Milk who did massive voter registration drives. They went door to door. And the case they were making was basically, I'm gay and this is going to hurt me. And look, I'm a friendly, kind person who's good at my job, who wants to just make ends meet like you do. And why do you want to put me out of a job?
Harvey Milk was a San Francisco city supervisor and one of the first openly gay elected officials anywhere, nationwide.
My name is Harvey Milk, and I'm here to recruit you.
Milk was an outspoken opponent of the Briggs Initiative, but he knew he couldn't defeat it alone. So he encouraged gay people to come out and prove what a force they really were.
There are 15 million lesbians and gay men waiting to hear your voice. We are coming out of the closet. When are you going to come out of yours?
It's hard to understand in 2024 just how radical that was, but there were a lot of people in the gay community, especially older gays, who did not think gay people should come out, who thought this is actually going to backfire for us. Just let us live our quiet lives, go to our bars, be closeted in public, sort of like a don't ask, don't tell philosophy applied to an entire life. Like, yeah, people kind of know you're gay, but we don't need to talk about it that much. That's what's going to turn people off. And so this idea that Harvey Milk and many other activists adopted in the campaign against the Briggs Initiative was, we have to come out because otherwise they're not going to know that they know us. They're not going to know that we're already going to church with them and serving them in restaurants and, delivering their mail and friends with their kids or are their kids. And so there were tens of thousands of people in California who were just coming out to not just the people in their lives, but everyone they knew. There were little business cards they would hand out that basically said, hi, you've just, ridden the bus next to a gay person and you survived. Please think about this when you vote in November.
Yeah. It seemed really important that there was this realization that you actually need all these different groups of people working together to fight something that seemed as overwhelmingly popular as the Briggs Initiative. Like, you needed the people who are going to join forces with the unions. You needed the people who are like, everyone needs to come out. And you needed the people who are kind of a little more conservative to all just sort of do their own thing, but have a similar goal. And there's this one moment I want to make sure that we talk about, which is how Ronald Reagan got involved in the Briggs fight. Because I don't think anyone listening to this would see Ronald Reagan as an ally to gay people, but he did come out against Briggs. Can you just talk about how that happened?
Yeah, this was actually a pretty controversial move at the time. David Mixner, who was an activist in Los Angeles and actually a very accomplished political strategist as a closeted gay man, he had managed the winning campaign of LA's first Black mayor. He said, look, Ronald Reagan, he had recently finished 2 terms as governor. He was really popular in the state, not just among, conservatives. He might be the only person that can turn things around for us sort of in the last months of the campaign when things still weren't looking good for gay people. And a lot of his allies in the movement said, no, you can't align yourself with or sort of humble yourself before this terrible person who is against so much of what the other things that we're trying to do with our political movement. And David Mixner said, I've got to do this anyway. You can tell me I'm wrong if I fail. And so he knew a couple closeted people who were aides to Ronald Reagan. He says he knew a few of them as well as their wives did. He met up with them. They got him a meeting with Ronald Reagan. And Briggs was meeting with Ronald Reagan, too. Both sides were really lobbying him for his endorsement. And David Mixner went in and made an argument that wasn't at all about gay rights. He said, this is going to cause chaos in the classroom because it's going to allow students to blackmail their teachers, even a straight teacher. If a student gets a bad grade, they're going to say, look, I'm going to tell the school board you're gay. There's going to be a hearing. It's going to be humiliating for you. Is that what you really want? And it's going to be impossible to discipline students under that system. That was convincing to Ronald Reagan, and he came out against it in a statement and an op-ed. And I think there were a lot of factors that turned things around in those final months, but Reagan's endorsement was certainly one of them.
So in the end, David Mixner's coalition-building strategy was vindicated. But that doesn't mean harmony ensued in the anti-Briggs camp.
A lot of people have credited Anita Bryant and John Briggs with making the gay movement this sort of politically sophisticated, broad-based political juggernaut that it is today, because gay men and lesbians weren't even working together at the time. There was extreme suspicion among lesbians of the gay rights movement because organizations had been led by men. They had been very sexist and very focused on issues that were important to gay men in particular. And so this was a moment where people realized we don't have a chance unless we band together. And it forced people to hash out their differences or just really accept their differences.
This cooperation paid off. On November 7th, 1978, Californians defeated the Briggs Initiative handily. In the wake of that vote, there was an outpouring of joy in the streets of San Francisco.
State Senator John Briggs has just conceded the election.
The crowd went crazy. They were dancing. They had to shut down Santa Monica Boulevard because people were dancing in the streets. And it was extraordinary driving back. I mean, it was like New Year's Eve.
But these celebrations didn't last long. Less than a month after Briggs was defeated at the ballot box, a disgruntled city supervisor who'd stepped down and wanted his job back walked into San Francisco's City Hall and shot Harvey Milk. He shot the mayor, George Moscone, too.
No event in history happens in a vacuum. And the fact that Harvey Milk was killed 3 weeks after this election, you can't draw a sort of one-to-one connection between these things, but the temperature had been really turned up on this debate over gay rights. The man who killed Harvey Milk, he had sort of a personal score to settle, but it was related to this sense that he was at odds with the rest of the Board of Supervisors. He was very conservative, anti-gay. He had campaigned on a platform of, ridding San Francisco of the perverts and deviants that were taking over. And that sort of led to this personal issue that eventually led to the murders of Harvey Milk and George Moscone.
For the people who had just, had this incredible victory of defeating the Briggs Initiative, it must have just been such whiplash to all of a sudden Harvey Milk is assassinated right in City Hall.
Yeah, and that was part of the reason why I felt like it was important to include that, because this was, we're telling the story of what happened through the eyes of the people who lived it and trying to capture what that was like for them. And so there was this moment of extreme validation and hope with the victory over the Briggs Initiative, this victory that really looked impossible for a long time and was the first statewide vote on gay rights. And here they were, they won it. And 3 weeks later, this man who not only was one of the most visible activists against the Briggs Initiative, but was also considered a really promising rising star in California politics and in gay rights, like across the country, he was gone. And he was somebody who a lot of people looked up to as a mentor, a father figure even, and somebody who they looked to tell them what to do next and where they were going. And now it was like, what's our future now?
When we come back, why it feels like we're seeing the same 2 steps forward, 1 step back progress in the queer community today. This show is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
In 1978, gay people in California faced a dire threat.
Proposition 6, the Briggs Initiative.
The teaching profession is riddled with the homosexual element.
John Briggs is going to fire every gay and lesbian school teacher in the state of California.
I'm Christina Cauterucci. This season on Slow Burn, we'll explore how a nationwide backlash against gays and lesbians led to a massive showdown in California.
This was tens of thousands of pissed off gay guys and lesbians roaring down Market Street.
With so much at stake, young people became activists.
We've got to fight back. We can't let this happen in California.
And activists became leaders.
My name is Harvey Milk, and I'm here to recruit you.
Slow Burn, Season 9, Gays Against Briggs. Listen to the whole season now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Almost 50 years after queer activists defeated the Briggs Initiative, Christina Cauterucci says she feels like she's watching history repeat itself. In the last couple of years, there have been threats to gender-affirming care, bans on trans athletes, even a Supreme Court justice signaling he's open to overturning the right to gay marriage. And these political shifts have real consequences. A recent report found that in states with laws targeting the LGBTQ community, the number of hate crimes in schools has more than quadrupled.
The whole fact of the backlash feels incredibly similar to me. And today it's also about trans people, where we're, people across the country who maybe have never met a trans person are starting to see trans storylines and trans actors. And they're hearing about trans people in the news. They're seeing them at protests. And now here comes the Republican Party saying, this kind of quote unquote new group you've been hearing about, they're actually a danger to your kid. And so when you're seeing them seemingly gaining power and influence, that's something bad for you and your family and for this country. And that's exactly what was happening back then, what people were saying about gay people.
The focus now is also schools, too, just like it was back in the 70s. But it's interesting because while the fight over Briggs was a fight about teachers and what teachers can teach in the classroom and say about themselves, there's this additional layer now where laws are targeting children themselves, like where they can go to the bathroom and how they can express themselves and what sports teams they can be on, things like that. That seems like an important shift. Why do you think it's happening?
I mean, the idea of children coming out as gay and being accepted by their families was not something that people really were considering at the time in the 70s. Although Harvey Milk and others would say, I'm doing this for gay kids, but it was never about those kids are going to come out and, be accepted in their schools. It was just, I need them to know that a better life is possible. And so the culture has shifted such that now there are more children feeling ready to come out and, brave enough to pursue who they really are at a younger age. And the really perverse thing about what's happening now is, especially with trans kids, the trans kids who would have been able to access gender-affirming care are the ones whose parents support them. And so it's still a very small population because plenty of trans kids will come out or not come out and not be supported by their parents. And so it's just another effort by the right, just as it was back then, to target a seemingly vulnerable group. And so obviously children can't vote. They don't have the same ability to speak up for themselves in public. In the 1970s, gay people in general kind of seems like that to a lot of people. There weren't a lot of people who were publicly agitating for gay rights. There were a lot of closeted people. And so
it sounds like you're saying it's easier to pick on the kids, really.
Absolutely. And I mean, we're seeing even more exact parallels today. I mean, Greg Abbott has said that he wants to ban trans people from being teachers. He targeted this one teacher who wore this male teacher who wore a dress on Spirit Day and said, is this the person who you want to teach your kids?
This type of behavior is not okay. And this is the type of behavior that we want to make sure we end in the state of Texas.
That teacher ended up resigning because of the public backlash. I mean, as much as there are some things that are different in terms of who conservatives are targeting, a lot of it is the same. They're also trying to roll back non-discrimination protections exactly like they were doing in 1978.
You spoke to so many activists for this series who played important roles in shutting down the Briggs Initiative. How did they feel about what's happening today? Like, did they express dismay about where things were decades later? Were they hopeful?
This was really, really heartbreaking to have to talk to some of these people who thought that they had beaten back this narrative for good back then, to now ask them, what is it like to see this come back full force? And they were really scared. I mean, to a person saying it's worse now than it was back then.
Why worse?
Well, in part because we're in a different place in politics right now. A lot more of we talked about Ronald Reagan. Nobody in Ronald Reagan's position in the Republican Party would ever come out in support of trans kids today. There's also, organized domestic terror groups showing up at Drag Story Hour and Pride festivals. And I think there was a sense back then that the only place we can go is up. We have a lot less to lose. And today, it feels like we have a lot to lose. And the fact that they're targeting children, I think, is particularly disturbing to those activists, as it is to me and many other people, because these children are just learning who they are and figuring out how to feel about themselves. And the idea that they would be used as political pawns is scary, both because of its political efficacy and because this is a moment where kids' sense of self is being created. And if you're keeping kids from becoming who they are and feeling good about who they are, that's going to have long-lasting effects. And the idea that we would sort of be regressing in such a dramatic way is particularly disturbing to the people who fought the Briggs Initiative back then.
Yeah. How do you hope people are going to hear the show that you made? Like, do you want it to be a textbook of a sort to make sure history isn't forgotten, or an instruction manual on how to fight back against anti-gay bigotry?
I think there's only a limited way in which it can be used as an instruction manual, although certainly some of their tactics, the coming out campaign, I think were really powerful, and there are things that people can take from it today. But I want people to hear it and remember that seemingly impossible things have been done before, and that fighting back is worth it even if you don't think you can win. And I want people to also hear it and laugh and have fun, because these were people who found immense joy in each other and laughed as they were fighting and made songs about it. I mean, I could have put an original protest song in every episode if the producers had let me. And I think that's an important part of it, too, that there's a value in community and solidarity among queer people that doesn't just have to do with political rights. There are some things that legislatures can't take away, and that's community support. And that's what these people were doing for each other. That's what they were building in the Castro. And whether or not any political fight is won or lost, the connections they built through the campaign itself lasted. And it's honestly, a lot of people have said that's what carried the community through the AIDS crisis too. Lesbians and gay men had learned how to work together. So when AIDS came down, they were fighting back when the government was ignoring it. Lesbians were caring for gay men on their deathbeds. That was a huge moment for unity in the LGBTQ community. And a lot of people have said it wouldn't have necessarily happened if it wasn't for the Briggs Initiative. I think it helps to take a long view and think of it not just as individual political battles, but what is the community creating for itself?
Christina Cauterucci, I'm so grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Christina Cauterucci is a senior writer at Slate and the host of Slow Burn, Season 9, Gays Against Briggs. That season just wrapped up. You can listen to the whole thing and the rest of the Slow Burn catalog wherever you get your podcasts. And that's the show. If you're a fan of what we're doing here at What Next, the best way to support our work is to join Slate Plus. Go on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. We are led by Alicia Montgomery with a little boost from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you back here next time.